Sisters and brothers, there will be no slides because I used to be the medieval historian. In Middle Ages there was no slides, nothing like that, except computers, of course. I will use my computer. I've been asked to say a few reflections on the subject Garden of History, some conclusions and lessons to be taken from church history. I want to start with two quotations. One is from St. Augustine, so this is the end of the 4th century, and the second is from Francis de Sales, from Philotea. This is the 17th century. So we will start with Augustine. I will start with his language, but we had the Mass in Latin today, so we can try our Latin. The most important part I will translate into English. But Augustine says, Secuti sunt eum arteres sancti, usque ad effusionem cruoris, usque ad similitudinem passionis. Secuti sunt marteres, sed non soli. Non enim postquam illi transierunt, pons incisus est. Aut postquam ipsi biberunt, pons ipse sicatus est. Habet, fratres, habet hortus ille Dominicus, non solum rosas martyrum, sed et lilia virginum, et coniugarum hederas, violasque viduarum. This is the most important part. The garden of the Lord, brethren, includes, yes, it truly includes not only the roses of martyrs, but also the lilies of virgins, and the ivy of married people, and the violets of widows. Okay, that's Augustine. And then Francis de Sales. When God the Creator made all things, He commanded the plants to bring forth fruit, each according to its own kind. He has likewise commanded Christians, who are the living plants of His church, to bring forth the fruits of devotion, each one in accord with his character, his station, and his calling. I said that devotion must be practiced in different ways by the nobleman and by the working man, by the servant and by the prince, by the widow and by the unmarried girl and by the married woman. Tell me, please, my Philotea, whether it is proper for a bishop to want to lead a solitary life like a Carthusians, or for married people to be no more concerned than a Capuchin about increasing their income, or for a working man to spend his whole day in church like a religious, or on the other hand, for a religious to be constantly exposed like a bishop to all the events and circumstances that bear on the needs of our neighbor. Is not this sort of devotion ridiculous, unorganized, and intolerable? Yes, this absolute error, yet this absolute error occurs very frequently. Beautiful quotations, but they provoke many questions. Has this beautiful variety and diversity been always appreciated in history of the Church? Has it been not extinguished by clericalism? Clericalism not only of ecclesiastical structures, but clericalism of Christian spirituality also. The most important question is not historical, it's for present, but it's not for this lecture. But this most important question is, can the Church of today recognize herself in the picture of Hortus Dominicus, Garden of the Lord? The church history can be traced as history of a tension between unity and uniformity. It is not the same. Unity and uniformity. The temptation to unify, not to unite, to unify. The temptation was great, was real, and difficult to pass over. I will try to show it, quoting just two examples, two study cases. The first one, I think, explored not too often, but this is a very focused case. British Islands, Britain, Scotland, Ireland, and England, this is the end of the 6th century, the beginning of 7th. The church there consists of three different, let us say, currents. The first current was the old church of ancient Britons, gathered in monastic centres, especially in Wales. This is the first current. And it goes back to the 2nd century. We know from the writings of Tertullian that there were missionaries sent from Rome, this is important, from Rome to Britain. The second current is so-called Celtic Church, founded by St. Ninian, St. Patrick. The first center of the church was Wykład, on the north from the Hadrian's Wall. Ninian studied in Rome, so he brought Christianity from Rome to the Celtic lands. Wykład was also a place where Patrick probably got his formation. And the third current is Roman Church, brought to England by Augustine since 596. So we have three different currents of the church, all three coming from Rome, but all three different. In the 6th century, and especially 7th, all of them were different. They came from Rome, but the last one, Augustine, could not recognize the other two as Roman churches, especially the Celtic one. There were different, there were liturgical differences. There is the date of the Passover, the liturgy of baptism. The Celtic liturgy of baptism was based on Gallical examples, having beautiful moments like washing of the feet during the liturgy of baptism, washing of the feet. Beautiful. There were, of course, the other differences. The most important difference was in the organization of the church. The Celtic church was based on the big monastery. The Roman church was based on the diocese and on a bishop. In the Celtic situation, in Ireland, for instance, the bishop was not an important fellow. Patrick consecrated 300 bishops in his time. 300 for Ireland. Surely not for the government. So, the most important fellow, a man was important in Irish church, the Celtic church was abbot, arch-abbot. The tension took place at so-called the Synod at Augustine's Oak. The date is 604. Augustine invited 7 bishops from the Celtic Church. And of course, before going to meet Augustine, they went to ask an abbot how to behave. And the abbot said, you need to see if he is a God's man. If he is a man of God, follow him. Okay. How can we discern? How can we discern that he is the man of God? The monk said to them, if he is like Christ, humble of heart, he is the man of God, follow him. If he is not humble of heart, do not listen to him. How can we discern he is humble of heart. Now there will be exact quotation. If he rises on your approach, you will know that he is a servant of Christ. But if he despises you and is not willing to rise in your presence, even though your number are greater, you should despise him in return. If he rises, to welcome you. He is humble enough to lead you. If he not, go away. And now the quotation from Venerable Bede. Now it happened that Augustine remained seated while they were coming. And there was no dialogue, there was no meeting. They went home. You see, the problem is not diversity, the problem is pride and struggle for power. This is the real problem. This is why we cannot create the church as garden. Because the most important matter for us is power, power, power. So what destroys the beauty of the garden is pride, not diversity. The second important date is 664, the last moment of existing of so-called Celtic Church, and the Synod of Whitby. So the first one who stood up on the Synod was a king, not the bishops, the king, Austria. And he says something like that. It was fitting that those who are served one God should observe one rule of life and not differ in the celebration of the heavenly sacraments, seeing that they all hope for one kingdom of heaven. They ought therefore to inquire as to which was the truer tradition, and then all follow it together. So it is the king who proposes uniformity. But it's much better for a king. It is a disaster for the church, but it is much better for the king. And if the church depends on the king, the church has to follow the king's instructions. So the discussions started, and the Irish group, the Celtic group, wanted to say, okay, our customs, our traditions go back to St. John, the Apostle. Okay, so the Roman, the Latin bishops said, no, our go back to St. Peter and Paul. So the king asked, who is the gatekeeper of the paradise? You know the answer. So who is John? John is no one. Okay, they say, but all our saints, like Saint Columba, they follow these traditions and customs. Okay, these are your saints, not ours, not ours. There's something striking. Even Venerable Bede, who admires the Celtic Christians, admires their zeal, admires their piety, still admiring them, he calls them heretics all the time. Heretics, heretics, heretics. Why? Because they have different date of Easter, and they have different liturgy during the baptism, and they have different tonsure. There was one called the tonsure of Peter and one of Paul. A huge, huge difference in faith. Important enough to divide the church. Okay, 11 years after Synod of Whitby, Winfried, called Boniface, was born in Anglo-Saxon land and Anglo-Saxon church. This unified church. And being 43, he had been sent by Pope Gregory II to preach the gospel to Germany. Sent from Rome, he proclaimed not only the gospel, but the Roman model of the church as one and only. Roman liturgy, Roman structures, Roman customs. One can trace the limit of this attitude, the real struggle, in a famous letter of Pope Zachariah to Boniface. The letter is dated 745. Pope tries to answer to hundreds of bishops' questions concerning the true church, means Roman church. So only true and only right. Among the questions, there is also one dedicated to the right way, to the Roman way of eating the bacon. In Latin, lardum. So what does the Roman Church teach us about eating bacon? The Pope's answer is amusing but also significant. The Pope says, Nam et hoc inquisisti post quantum temporis debet lardum comedi. Nobis a patribus constitutum pro hoc non est. Tibi autem petendi concilium prevenus quod non oporte ad illud mandi priusquam fumos sicert aut igne coquatur. So the answer is, we have no any constitution passed to us by the fathers about eating the bacon. But there is an advice to you. Eat it when it is smoked or grilled. The tendency of Romanizing the church seemed probably strange or even false to the Pope. Rome in the age of Boniface seemed to be much more Greek than Latin. Between 650 and 750, Rome saw 17 popes, 5 Syrians, 3 Greeks, 3 from Sicily, that means from Eastern spirit, Eastern world. So only 6 from Italy and 5 from the city of Rome. More than a century later, in 869, when Cyril, brother of Methodius, died in Rome, the Pope, Hadrian II, ordered, this is the quotation, ordered all the Greeks living in Rome, but also Latins, to gather together with candles to sing over him and to make a funeral like the one worthy of the Pope himself. This is from the life of Constantine. So there was a most splendid Greek liturgy in the heart of the papal city. He was buried in San Clemente. And the splendid Greek liturgy was ordered by a Roman pontiff. On the other side, let me remind you that the closest context for this event was Phocian, so-called Phocian Schism. The beautiful model of the church, the garden of variety, unity of diversity, was moving to the past and to be replaced for long by the spirit of exclusivism. And only mine is good, only mine is right, only mine is true. Okay, the second, much shorter, but I think very important, the second study case is not the level of the church's organization, but a very individual level of different ways to sainthood, different ways of living the faith. And we know, you can start from the New Testament, there are many different gifts, but it is always the same Spirit There are many different ways of serving, but it is always the same Lord. There are many different forms of activity, but in everybody it is the same God who is at work in them all. The particular manifestations of the Spirit granted to each one is to be used for the general good. So this is, of course, 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And it goes very well with those quotations from the beginning, especially by Augustine, that the garden of God has different flowers, and each one is very needed. It's good and needed. So there is a vocation and grace and piety and sainthood of martyr, martyr and virgin, married and not married, widow, prince, servant, knight, worker. All of us, I hope, share this conviction. But again, looking back to our history, one can easily find a different lesson. So, the same way as before, just one focus case. This time from Poland. I am Polish. But it's closely tied with Hungary. I mean, 4 women, saintly women, living in Poland, but in few ways connected with Hungary. They live, all of them, they lived in the 13th century. Saint Hedwig, Anne, wife of Prince Henry the Pious, and he was grandfather. Her grandfather was Hungarian King Bela III. And Salomia, wife of Koloman, son of Andrew II. And Kinga, daughter of Bela IV of Hungary. All of them, all 4, lived in a marriage. Hedwig, 48 years. Anne and Salomea, circa 25 years. Kinga, more than 30 years. Salomea and Kinga lived their marriages in virginity. Hedwig gave birth to 7 children, 4 sons and 3 daughters. Anne, we don't know. Some say 10, some say 12. And this is the good moment for question. Why don't we know how many children did she have? We do not know, because that fact was not so important for hagiographers. It didn't belong to true criteria of sainthood. These wives and mothers in the Vita become nuns, even if they never, like Hedwig, took the vows. Hedwig never took vows. She lived like a nun, cistercian, but he never became one. She never became one. She lives like a nun, clothes like a nun, eats, or better fast, like a nun. Life of Anne, Salomea and Kinga is reduced to the period of their being poor clerics. Significant is a case of Kinga. Kinga, before she became the poor clerk, had taken vows as a consecrated widow. But the historians know nothing about it. To be consecrated widow is not enough. You have to be nun. If you are nun, you are on the way to sainthood. If you live in a marriage, if you live as widow, there is no chance for you. Not at all. Not at all. Reading the Vita of those 4 women, we know that marriage is no longer God's call and source of grace. No. It is suspected, and it is only a danger necessity for the church, because we need to survive. That's why we need marriages. But this is just tolerated, not promoted. The way to sainthood is monastic way and clergy, but not all the clergy, only the higher clergy. This is the way to sainthood. Why? Because probably the most important ideal of sainthood was contemptus mundi. So if you reject the world, you cannot live in the world and in a worldly way. Yeah. But in such a perspective, tell me in what way the lay people can understand the lay vocation. The striking example is in the second generation of Franciscans. Surely you know that among 12 first brothers of St. Francis, 11 were lay people. The only one was a priest. That's why in his first rule, Regula Bullata, the office of provincial minister could be fulfilled by a lay brother. And in fact, all the important offices could be fulfilled by lay brothers in the rule written by Francis. 15 years after, Haimo of Faversham forbade the lay brothers to take any important office in the order. And then, half a century later, Franciscan historian, very good historian, Salim Bene, described the provincial chapter in Siena. And he says, the majority in the order belongs still to the lay brothers. Why? They had no right to say the Mass. They cannot listen to the confessions. What are they for? So even for a Franciscan, the presence of lay brothers is not to be longer understood in the community they create. So the variety of garden was expelled by clericalism, not only in everyday running of the church, government of the church, but even in describing models of sainthood living to eternity. So this is not a question of here and now. It goes to you are not monastic, you are not clergy. There is no model of sainthood for you. Look how far we are from the first quotations. It is a big temptation of uniformism. There are many people thinking that when they try to unify church, they build the unity. This is not true. They make the divisions. Man, since the beginning, has been placed and called to live in a garden and to take responsibility. The gardening, as you said. And this is our call. A garden, so also the resurrection of Christ from his tomb. So the recreation of man. The creation took place in the garden and recreation took place in the garden. You can say that the garden testified our birth and rebirth. Garden, meaning the beauty of variety, the community of diversities, is our natural and divine space of life. Uniformity is a sin against God, against church, and against human being. Thank you for listening.